Hi everybody, it's Missy Mayhem and you're watching the Moxi Roller Skates YouTube channel. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to skate on sidewalks and other odd surfaces. Skating outside can be really scary for more reasons than one. I mean, first off, you might have new obstacles that are challenging, or it could just be old obstacles that are challenging and that you just haven't overcome yet. Knowing how to overcome those challenges is super important and will lead to the growth and development in your outside skating. We're going to be getting into some common odd surfaces that you may encounter and that you're probably looking to conquer. Those surfaces are going to be sidewalks, cracks, wooden bridges, speed bumps, and debris. Have you ever just completely ate it over an odd surface? Well, for me, it was a speed bump that I'll never forget. If you don't want to hear my story time, then please skip ahead as I share this funny story on how I overcame odd surfaces. Timestamps are provided in the description. So here's the story. I was beginning out on my skate journey and I skated outside in the dark because frankly I didn't want anybody to see me. And I came across one of those non-hill hills. You know, the kind that doesn't look like a hill, but once you're on it on roller skates, it feels like a slope. Yeah, so needless to say, I caught a lot of speed and all of a sudden, because I was too worried about my speed, I didn't pay attention to the glorious, unavoidable speed bump that was glaring at me in front of me. And I panicked and I froze and I didn't know what to do other than take it. And I just soared right over it, but because I didn't have a good stance and probably numerous other factors, I just crashed really hard onto my knees and sat there in the darkness. So definitely not recommended to skate in the dark without lights of some kind, but speed bumps and odd surfaces can come out of nowhere, and if you don't know how to approach them and go over them, it can end really badly. So I want to take some time in this video to share with you exactly why it's important to know how to go over those odd surfaces. First up, let's talk cracks and sidewalks. Now I'm sure you've come across your sidewalk and you've thought, I want to skate on the sidewalk. It's off the street. It's definitely the safer option. I'm here to tell you that the sidewalk is a great option, but it is not always the best option. If you do have a safe street to skate, you should probably stick to the side and hug the cars and try to skate on the street. Normally your street is going to be a little bit more smooth, and the cracks of the sidewalk really do mess up your flow of getting good speed. So if you're not looking for speed and you're just looking to cruise and take your slow time on your skates, then maybe the sidewalk is for you. And that is totally okay. But we need to know how to skate on the sidewalk and how to skate over cracks. And you can come across a crack even when you're on the street. So it's really good to know how to go over them. Well, first things first, you have to stagger your feet. Staggering your feet, what does that mean? I'm sure you've heard it a lot of times in my videos, but I will repeat it just for definition. Staggering your feet is when you have one foot behind and one foot in front, equally distributing your weight across your skates so that you feel more controlled into your stance and you have more ground to cover being balanced with your feet extended rather than side by side where you have to meet the crack rather than one meets and one rolls over. A good stagger will save you in most situations. So definitely practicing a good stagger stance or approaching it with a good diagonal stride. A good stride over a sidewalk is going to make it easier for you to go over that crack with a little bit of force and momentum as you go over each crack. So a good stride is definitely going to help you a lot when going over a sidewalk. And most importantly, that staggered stance, like I mentioned before. Also, when it comes to sidewalks, you're going to want to think about, how do I get off the sidewalk, right? Other than your stereotypical bail to the grass, right? How do you get off the sidewalks? Because we all know sidewalks end, and they end with not the most prettiest exit. Usually it's a pressed cobblestone, like pebble type of surface, and that usually, depending on how well it was put there, can be very bumpy or not so bumpy. And you also have the always dreaded bubbles that are at the end. You usually find those more in street areas, more city-like street areas, or just more populated areas. Sometimes they have the larger circles. They look like little gumdrops on the exit of the sidewalk. Now, can we roll over both of these weird surfaces? Yes. I know, you're thinking, but how? And I'm gonna say it, you may not like it, but it's gonna be speed. Speed over those is the best. Just like when we talk about bridges here soon, we're gonna be talking about how speed helps us get over those quick multiple vibrations. So like you're literally gonna go over it instead of and fall. So the slower you go, the harder it's gonna be. Just know that it is totally possible to go over the end of the sidewalk. You just wanna make sure that you're staggered in your stance and you're strong in your legs and you take it with a good stagger. And just really take that off into the next transition. That is gonna be your best bet if you're going to try to take it head on. Now, mind you, some of them are gonna be really filled with debris and pebbles and street sand and all that good stuff, and really not good stuff, but you wanna try to avoid that sometimes. And it could be in a more populated turn where there's a lot of debris that collects, and that might be not the best one to go through. You can kind of go around it. So there's always a good exit strategy. When you're looking at sidewalks and the end of their sidewalks, look at the curb. The curb is going to start with a heavy drop off and then slowly get down to a lower transitional drop off the curb. So you can choose the best point in which you want to jump off the curb. So for me, since I don't really like to jump very high, I like to go for the easiest way out. So if we're looking at our sidewalk and its end, there's gonna be a point where you can cruise along the side and jump off the curb. Now, not a lot of people like to hop off curbs. It's very intimidating at first. And if you don't practice it, it might be something that you're not willing to do in the moment. And that's okay. And it might be more willing for you in the moment to just take it head on and have a deep stagger. So whatever is good for you and in the moment, and whatever your brain says, hey, I want to do this, might be the one to do, but make sure that you know how to do both of those so that you can at least have that opportunity in the moment to choose which one you want. Up next, bridges. Now, bridges can come in one of two ways in my experience that I've come across, and that is wooden or cement. And usually with cement, you can feel it just like how you can feel it in your car, the da-da, da-da, da-da. It's kind of like bumpy. So you're gonna need to be able to control yourself and control that excessive amount of ground changing by getting into a low squat and staggered stance and a heavy footed stride. It's a hard skate, like you gotta be ready for it. And you have other bridges that are wooden, more common to the community setting. You may have a trail and it goes across a small bridge. Usually that bridge is gonna be wooden, and 9 out of 10, it's gonna be chunky and it's not gonna be very smooth. And how do we go across that? First things first, you're gonna need a really good staggered stance. Staggered stance, what is that? Fresh reminder, it's gonna be when your feet are separated from each other, one in front, one behind, and you have your weight equally distributed on both feet, and you're sinking, bending your knees to the ground. That is a good stagger stance. And when you have a good stagger stance, it's gonna help you absorb all the extra bumps and momentum that you are getting so that you can go over it more smoothly. Now, of course, this is gonna sound crazy to some of you, but the best way to approach a wooden bridge more than likely is with speed. I know it sounds crazy. Why would we want to go over an obstacle that can trip us up with speed? It's because the level of unevenness is so close to each other, they're barely uneven, that it's safe enough to go fast over it. When I say fast, I don't mean Speedy Gonzalez fast. I mean just a little bit of momentum, a little bit more momentum than you probably would think about approaching it, so that you can smoothly go across all of the bumps rather than going through the bumps. You want to go through the bumps, if that makes any sense. So that's what you're aiming for when you're trying to stagger your feet going with speed. Now, that's not the only way that you can go across the bridge. 100%, you can go at it at a much slower pace. A really good technique to do is like a push-off. It's essentially when you're pushing off with one of your toe stops in the same mechanism that a skateboarder would with their foot and one foot on the skateboard. It's creating your momentum so that you have full control over what you're doing. It's really good to do if you've got a railing on your bridge perhaps, or maybe even a wall or some kind, then you can assist yourself. Or if you don't have any of that, you're gonna squat and use that good old core to maintain your stability and keep you upright. Next up, speed bumps. Speed bumps, your best bet with coming across the speed bump is to think about your speed. How fast are you going, and should you be going that fast? It might be good to slow down and stagger your feet so that you can roll over the speed bump with equal weight distributed so that you don't get chucked from the speed bump into the asphalt that's in front of you. You also want to consider if you may want to jump over the speed bump. Now, jumping is definitely a personal choice. I personally am not a big fan of jumping, but when it comes to fight or flight, usually jumping is my response time instead of trying to stagger my feet or do something and take it in a different way. So if jumping is your response for that fight or flight moment, then it might be good to just practice jumping over an obstacle like a speed bump so that when it does happen, or if it does happen, you will have a good subconscious reaction instead of having to create a reaction in the moment when it's happening. So that pretty much covers speed bumps. When you're going across a speed bump, you really do want to make sure that your feet are staggered and or that you're ready for that jump once you come across it. And if you're not ready for either of those, make sure that you lower yourself as low to the ground as possible so that when you go over the speed bump, you'll be able to catch yourself as low to the ground and have as least of an impact as possible. So hopefully that you won't hurt yourself as much. Since we just covered speed bumps, I do want to take the time to briefly just cover one other surface that usually is pretty common around speed bumps, and that is raised painted surfaces. Now, raised painted surfaces can come across in any situation in the street, whether it's a parking lot and you've got raised lines, or it is just a crosswalk with just straight up a raised crosswalk. And usually that paint is painted on really thick, so it has its own layer. And when you go across it, you can feel it like how you can going across a bridge with that small uneven surfaces. And just like how we go over a bridge, you want to make sure that you keep your feet super staggered so that you can go across the crosswalk in the best way possible. Now, always consider that debris is going to be more prevalent in crosswalks and at the end of sidewalks. So this leads us into our next topic about different types of debris and how to avoid certain ones and which ones are okay to kind of roll over. Let's talk debris. Debris can come in many different types of ways and forms. One of the most common that you'll see is what I like to call street sand. Now, street sand is usually formed from a lot of different pebbles grinding down to almost a fine sand-like powder. And you want to make sure that any sand that you're crossing, if it's a large quantity, that you try to go as slow across it as possible so that it doesn't get all up in your bearings. Sand and bearings is a naughty no-no. But also, it's not the end of the world. If you do have to go over it, try to consider, maybe jumping the curb and taking less of that street sand than you would taking it full straight on. Also, maybe just clean your bearings afterwards. But moving forward to different types of debris, you have rocks to consider. Now, rocks come in many different sizes and forms and shapes and flatnesses, and I kind of want to cover just a few of those. And I have some examples to show you. One of them is going to be a flat rock. Now, a flat rock doesn't really seem like that much, right? Like, a flat rock, but they can be tiny, they can be big, but when they're flat, they act as a stopper against your wheel. So to kind of demonstrate, your rock is going to be flat on the ground and your wheel is going to approach it, and it's literally just going to come to a stop and drag with your wheel. Now, when it drags with your wheel, that's usually when you end up tripping up, and it's usually not a good outcome. So try to avoid flat rocks if you can. They are hard to identify on a trail or in the street, but if you do happen to kind of catch one, it's good to let the people know that's around you. Maybe if you have other skaters with you, like, hey, watch out, I got some flat rocks over here, and people can avoid the rocks that they see. Other than that, it's just one of those things that you'll come across and you'll be able to identify them the longer that you skate. Another type of rock, obviously, we've got our big boys. Big rocks are, ones to avoid. They're not gonna go over your wheel. They are gonna get in your way. It's possible that they could be knocked out of the way, but 9 out of 10, we wanna try to avoid any type of big rocks or anything that's big, majorly in the way. Also, you have your stereotypical small rock, and if it's more rounded, then you're gonna have a better chance at getting that, getting across it. So you may not necessarily roll over it, but it will probably knock itself into a different direction because of the speed of your wheels and the roundness of the rock. It'll bounce off of it instead of get caught under your wheel like a flat rock would. We also have sticks to consider. You have long ones like this. Now, the longer the stick, usually the worse off it's gonna be for you because it's gonna create a drag and get completely caught under your wheel. So you don't want to have something that's too long than your wheel width because it's probably gonna trip you up and not be a so great experience. On the other hand, we have smaller twigs. Now, this one's thinner, this one's a little bit thicker. These little guys are totally okay. Your wheels will go right over them and or flick them out of the way and shouldn't cause you a lot of trouble. The final piece that I want to show you in debris is bark. Now, bark is something that you probably won't see in the city as much, but you will see in very heavily natured trails like we have here in Virginia. So I brought some along and to show you that some bark. So this is what bark looks like in my neighborhood. And with it, super flat. And with that, it's got a lot of different textures and sticky points that I like to call. So the more that you think your wheel is gonna be able to get caught up on something and drag, the more you wanna avoid it. If you think it's gonna go over it and be able to come out on the other side, then it's okay to roll over it. And what I mean by that is think of leaves. Leaves are something that you can easily roll over and it might get caught up in your wheels, but it'll make its way out because it breaks down. Versus something that may not break down, may not have a better chance at getting out of your wheels. So bark, for an example, if I was to break off a piece and it was a smaller piece of bark, it may drag under my skate, but it also may disintegrate. As you saw, pieces fell to the floor once I cracked it open. So if it's something that can be broken apart with ease and you can roll over it, then roll over it. If it doesn't look like it's gonna come out on the other side, then don't roll over it and try to avoid it. That's your best bet when it comes to debris. So I hope those tips were super helpful and you can take these tips and tricks to the street so that they can help you on your journey trying to conquer the road. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you got to learn everything that you needed in this awesome video about how to skate on sidewalks, cracks, and other odd surfaces. And if I missed anything, please make sure to let me know in the comments. I'd really love to get to you. And once again, thank you so much for all of your support by subscribing to this channel and shopping at moxiskates.com. And like always, stay rad.